JP. So I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about that, but first I thought I would just give you some context for who I am and where I come from. Those are my three kiddos. That's Mary Elizabeth on the left there, that's Maggie in the middle, and that's Liam on the right. And they just started, respectively, their 5th, 2nd, and kindergarten years at Holy Innocents. So I am an Orange County native. I should have put this up there, but St. Hedwig School, 9-year survivor, K through 8, in Los Alamitos. Go Celtics. And then I went from there kicking and screaming to Servite, because I thought the all-boys thing was going to be super weird. And it wasn't about a weekend that I fell in love with the experience. Went off to Loyola Marymount University after Servite, where I got a BA in theological studies, and then followed it with a master's while I was working there. So I spent my first 4 years out of college at LMU, doing a variety of things, and then Servite came calling again. They were hiring their first director of admissions. So I went back to Servite in 2005 to take on that role. While I was there, it was a time of a lot of fruitful transformation at Servite. Our president at the time, Pete Bowen, had ushered in the idea of what he called a formation program. And essentially all that it was sort of specifically instituting a program that encouraged every faculty and staff member on campus, whether they were a math teacher or a soccer coach or the debate moderator, to understand that their role in whatever it was that they were performing was to form young men in the faith, not only intellectually, but spiritually and ethically as well, to develop both the intellect and the will. So it was being a part of that sort of renewal at Servite that led me to really learn more about Catholic education. I knew I had been a product of Catholic education. My understanding, though, at the time was school. And really the biggest difference between Catholic schools and public schools were uniforms, daily mass, and kind of the culture that went along with it. But I never imagined that what took place in the classroom was really any different. I didn't think that was weird either. I mean, school was school. But it was while I was at Servite and started sort of read about and learn more about the history and philosophy of Catholic education and why Catholic schools were even started in the first place, that I came to realize, well, no, actually what happens at a Catholic school should be very, very different from what happens at a public school or any other type of school for that matter. So I went down a rabbit hole and discovered this renewal movement that was just budding at the time in about 2010 or so. And there was this renewal taking place in Catholic schools across the country that were sort of turning back towards the roots of the Catholic intellectual tradition, which sometimes is referred to as classical education. I tend to find the word classical to be somewhat distracting sometimes because it makes it seem like it's this certain type of thing over here, when in fact, up till about the turn of the century, the 20th century, education, what we understand as classical education today was just education. That's the only way people were educated for about 2,000, actually 3,000 or 4,000 years. And around the turn of the 20th century, we had progressive education come in, which could be a whole other talk. But it was a very different understanding of education. And the primary difference was that it was seen as utilitarian. Education became utilitarian. We are educating people so that they can go into the workforce and be productive. And that was it, as opposed to so that they can flourish as human beings and become their best selves, regardless of their career or the college that they attend. So that's what happened to me at Servite High School. Went down that rabbit hole. One of the things I found was the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, which was sort of leading the renewal movement across the country within the Catholic space. Classical education has blown up in every sector, which I'll get into in a few minutes. So I volunteered at the Institute for a few years just because I wanted to learn more and be a part of this renewal that was taking place. And then I actually worked there for 2 years as vice president. And while I was working for the Institute, my wife and I, Lizzie, who you see up there, the tallest, our oldest, who's now 10, about 7 years ago when she was 3, we were trying to figure out, as she was nearing school age, what we were going to do for her own education. I knew from the moment I stepped foot into St. Jerome Academy in Hyattsville, Maryland, the first Catholic classical school I ever set foot in. The second I set foot in that classroom, I knew two things. The first and foremost was that I had to give this education to my own kids. I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't. And the second was I kind of wanted to reorient my own career in Catholic education to serve this renewal movement. So that's what led me to work for the Institute. So we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with Lizzie. We were living in Orange County at the time. There weren't any options like this here in the Diocese of Orange. Long story short, I'm told that I need to talk to Father Peter Irving at Holy Innocents in Long Beach. He was very open to the idea of taking his parish school in this direction. So in 2018, we started undergoing a renewal at Holy Innocents. It was so successful that Father Peter was just so irritated that we were giving these TK through 8 students this wonderful education, and then we were watching them go off to the public high school system, because most of our demographic at Holy Innocents doesn't even have the means to go to a Catholic school, even if it was worth going to. Sorry, I didn't say that part. So Father Peter asked me to come on board full-time in about 2020 to lead an effort to appeal to the Archdiocese of Los Angeles to allow us to add grades 9 through 12 at our parish school at Holy Innocents. So a couple years later, we officially became the only parish TK through 12 Catholic classical school, I think west of the Mississippi. I don't know the exact statistic there, but it's rare to have a parish school like that. So very proud of that. Went briefly back to Servite in 2022 to take care of a few things, and that is sort of what led me to learn about the Camino School. And while my parish is Holy Innocents, and I'm very proud to still send my kids there, I was really excited to be a part of, going back 7 years ago when I was an Orange County native looking for an opportunity like this in Orange County. There wasn't an answer, and I learned about the vision of the Camino School and became its founding executive director, and very proudly we just opened our doors on Tuesday. I tell people we're classical both in curriculum and calendar. We went back to the old start school after Labor Day model. So we started school on Tuesday and just finished our first week, like I said, at noon today. So I'm really excited about that. So first I want to tell you a little bit more about the Camino School in particular, but then I want to spend the bulk, okay, thank you. I'll spend the bulk of my time talking about classical education. And when I say my time, I don't want it to be much. I'd rather get to Q&A and see what you want to learn more of. So, what is the Camino School? We are a Catholic classical liberal arts school in Orange County, and we serve families. The model is that we'll go kindergarten through 8th grade. As it turned out this year, we're serving students in kindergarten through 7th grade because of the families that came on board. So we've got a standalone kinder, a combined 1st and 2nd, combined 3rd and 4th, and then combined 5th through 7th. And I just sort of had this idea in mass to switch over here. This is a draft of an email that's going to go out to our mailing list later, but I thought I got to show them some pictures of actually what happened this week. So that's our headmaster, Martin Bowles. He and his wife, Julia, were actually instrumental in the founding of St. Monica Academy, which is another independent Catholic classical school up in the Pasadena area that was founded about a little over 20 years ago. So that's Mr. Bowles greeting students on day 1. This is him leading our morning assembly, which takes place each morning before school starts. The parent guild put a nice little reception together. Those are all our founding families. Here's the kindergarten on their first day of class, nice and excited. Some upper school students enjoying quiet reading time in our commons area. It's been so hot, we had PE indoors this week, so they were staying out of the heat. This is something we're really excited about. This is our chapel, which our chaplain, Father Luke Mata, was instrumental in helping us put together. And we celebrated our first all-school mass yesterday, which was standing room only. And there's Father Luke. And then this is Mr. Dudash, a longtime Newport Beach police officer who heard a call to teaching in a Catholic classical school about a year ago. Moved to Minnesota to do it, and then when he heard about the Camino School opening, moved his family back just a year later. So we're excited to have Mr. Dudash on board. Some of the kids enjoying lunch down at the park. We're down at the other end of our block is a beautiful park in Tustin. That's our 1st and 2nd grade teacher, Miss Santana, and those kids enjoying circle time. 3rd and 4th grade history class with Miss Degree. And then our 1st and 2nd graders spent this morning baking cupcakes to celebrate the end of the first week. So there's some snapshots of life at Holy Innocents this week. Camino School, look at that. I'm still, yeah. So why did we pick the name Camino? One of the things that really drew me to the vision of the Camino School was that the founders understood the potent power of a school community in changing culture. One of the biggest light bulb moments in my career as a Catholic educator was when I finally realized that the Catholic Church is not involved in education to run schools. It's involved in education to create culture. And when you understand that a school exists to build culture, all of your decisions are made differently. If you're simply there to run a school, then you do anything required to keep butts in seats. You do whatever parents want is the newest and latest trend. You know, you put iPads in the hands of all the students because everybody else is doing it. You got to keep up with the Joneses. If you're doing it to create culture, you make those decisions very differently. So when I saw that the founders wanted to create the school, not only for their own children, but to, as they said, renew the culture of California, I said, oh, these people understand how you renew culture. Schools are a great place to start. So Camino is in that legacy of St. Junipero Serra, of bringing Christian culture to California. And so we want to renew the Christian culture of California through the founding of first this school, and we hope, God willing, there will be more schools in the future. What's nice is that Camino is also the Spanish name of the inspirational book called The Way, which was written by St. Jose Maria Escrivá, whose spirituality really inspires our school as well. St. Jose Maria is the founder of Opus Dei, if you've heard of Opus Dei. And so that ended up being a nice bonus as well. So at Camino School, we have 3 pillars that we believe lead to an education for human flourishing. Not, college and career readiness, not just college and career readiness, but really, at the end of the day, human flourishing. So our 3 pillars are classical education, spiritual development, and character formation. So a classical education that really inspires a lifelong love of learning, that really helps students arrive at a command of language, and we'll talk about why that is in a minute, and rigorous thinking. A lot of schools use that buzzwords of critical thinking skills. Very few really give students the tools to engage in critical thinking. Spiritual development is obviously a big part of the reason for this school. We want our students to be, and everything that we do at the school, to be imbued with a Catholic worldview, to understand the world through that Catholic lens of our faith. We want to offer them frequent reception of sacraments. And we do have the commitment locally of Opus Dei to help us in this endeavor. The third pillar is character formation. And again, a lot of schools talk about character formation, but we do things very deliberately in that regard. And the first and most unique thing about the school, probably, even aside from our classical approach, is that we intend to develop into a single-sex approach after about 3rd grade. So co-ed from about K to 3, and then from 4th grade on, we intend to have single-sex classes where the boys are taught by men and the girls are taught by women. And the primary emphasis for doing it that way is so that we can give them really deliberate and methodical character formation, where they see role models that are like them, that they want to become like, and that we can offer the kind of education that is best suited for girls and the kind of education that is best suited for boys, because they're very different. So essentially, we're offering a very tailored, personalized approach. And that's kind of what I've already reviewed here. The co-ed level, and we'll talk about this a little more when I talk about what is classical education, but at that, what we call the grammar stage of about kindergarten through 3rd grade, they're really learning the building blocks of things. They're memorizing dates, they're memorizing great poetry and reciting great speeches, so that later, as they get into 4th grade and beyond, where we talk about them getting from the grammar stage to what's called the logic stage, then they can start comparing and contrasting those facts that they've memorized. And by the way, kindergartners through 3rd graders love memorizing facts. And this is something I learned firsthand, kind of the opposite side of that coin. When I was at Servite, one of the tenets of the formation program was we came up with this little book called the Core Book for all freshmen. And freshmen had to memorize everything in the Core Book. And the way we created the Core Book was we went to all the teachers at the freshman level and said, if we could demand that the freshmen master a certain element of the slice of your curriculum, that would help them, what would it be? And the math department said if they could master their multiplication tables through 20 instead of just through 12, it would really help them in upper math. Okay. So we tried. And getting high school boys to memorize multiplication tables beyond 12 was like it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire career as a Catholic educator. Now, you turn around and give that challenge to a second grader, and they'll have through 20 done by 3 o'clock this afternoon. And they'll love doing it, too. So that understanding of childhood development is part of what makes the classical approach successful, because you leverage what kids like doing at every stage. So little kids love memorizing. Middle school age kids love arguing. Older kids love talking, the rhetoric stage of now that I've learned all this information, how do I persuasively communicate it to a group of people in order to get them to align with my way of thinking or win a debate or side with my argument. What's that?
Is that the know-it-all phase?
Something like that, yeah. So, and a big part of the vision of the Camino Schools really is just responding to what parents want. Right? This isn't something that only we have come up with. I was going to just let you read this yourselves because I don't like reading to groups necessarily, but I think it could be hard to read sometimes. So the first quote says this: "We're committed to," and these are quotes from our families who have responded to the call, who are enrolled now. "We're committed to raising our children to have a love of learning, be upstanding community members, live a healthy lifestyle, and have a strong foundation in their Catholic faith. And we feel that the Camino Schools' classical model of education can help us achieve all of this." I think you can read that middle one just fine. Then the bottom says, "We believe that there's a great value in engaging with a community that is centered around a common goal. We desire to come alongside like-hearted parents who share our core values to help shepherd our children to be the salt and light of the world." So that's, it's really the other thing that's providential about being here today is that St. John Marin, and I wanted to publicly thank them, although I don't know that any of their community members other than JP are present, but they were really great hosts to us at the Camino School before we had a campus to leverage. So most of the admissions interviews that the headmaster and I, when we sat down with these families that were applying to come on board the school, actually happened right down the hall in their little library room here. So it's really neat to be here. And it was at that moment that I realized one of my favorite things about what's happening with the Camino School, and again, it goes back to schools being great vehicles of cultural change. The families that this project is attracting are so grateful, so enthusiastic to have this form of education to give their children. It's families who have learned about and are aware of this renewal in education that's taking place all over the country, and didn't have that opportunity for their own kids. Some have tried homeschooling to give it to them. That can be a real challenge if it's not something that you really feel called to. So the gratitude when we sat in those admissions interviews was just palpable. It was really, really inspiring to know that we were giving such a gift to these families who wanted it so badly. The other nice thing about our project is that we have a lot of schools to look at across the country who have gone before us. So there are other schools inspired by the same ideals that we are inspired by, that are inspired by the spirituality of St. Josemaria. In Washington, D.C., there's the Heights School in Oakcrest, in Chicago, in Houston, in Boston. We also have other schools that have gone before us. There's two schools because in most iterations of these kinds of schools, the ones inspired by St. Josemaria, there's usually a standalone all-boys school and a totally separate all-girls school. So again, another uniqueness of the Camino School is that the founders really wanted it to be under one umbrella to serve families a little more accessibly. So we're under one umbrella, but again, starting in at least grade 4, they'll go into those single-sex classes. So why Orange County? I think it's pretty obvious. I don't need to convince this group why Orange County is a great place to be doing something like this and leading cultural change. Got a great accessible and populous location. Families who need a school like this and have the means to help us get it off the ground, and to offer a unique option because there's no schools like this currently in Orange County. So our hope eventually, right now, we are renting space from Tustin Presbyterian Church in Old Town Tustin, which is a great little spot. We're very grateful for it. But our hope is to have a permanent campus somewhere south of the 55 freeway, in the general vicinity of Irvine or some of those neighboring communities. That tends to be where the nucleus of our families are coming from. And again, there's not as many schools in that area. We basically hit our year one enrollment target of 40, and you can see our targets over time. There's a lot of precedent as we talk to startup schools across the country. You usually do see a pretty significant enrollment gain in years 2, 3, and 4. I come to appreciate this last year. My personality is I will very excitedly jump into the void if it's something that I'm fired up about. I was reminded this past year that that's not a common personality trait. So selling a school that's just an idea, for parents to send off their most precious possessions to go try out for the first time can be a tough sell. But we hit our year one goal, and we hope to really grow a lot now that we can give something like a campus tour and have teachers that people can meet, things like that. So you can see our timeline and milestones. I'm not going to go into this much, but we're not only meeting but exceeding those milestones. And like I said, we look forward to not only enrollment growth, but a permanent home sooner rather than later as well. So there's our campaign objectives. We figured out phase one, which was our runway to launch. Our goal was to raise about $3 million. And we got that done. Obviously, a full campus build out or buying property in Orange County, California is going to cost a little more than $3 million. So our goal for the phase two is 25, and we hope that'll help us get to our permanent location. So at this point, I want to turn to a little more about that first of our 3 pillars in classical education. What is classical education? So instead of me just telling you what I think classical education is, what I'm going to do is briefly give you an overview of 2 recent research reports that have come out. The first is by Arcadia Education, and they did a market analysis of classical education in the United States. So I just want to give you an overview of what they concluded, because I mentioned that this is something that's really booming in all sectors, and they do a good job of summarizing that. So first of all, they said we need an operating definition of what do we mean when we say classical. So Arcadia defined it this way. They said classical schools aim to cultivate individuals of virtue who can think, speak, and write with clarity, are grounded in the Western intellectual and moral tradition, and perceive the world as an orderly and comprehensible reality. So I think that breaks down to that second bullet there. A dedication to scholastic rigor and the ethical development of their students, not just intellectual, but ethical as well. One of the things that helped me understand the difference between modern progressive education and classical education, when they talk about perceiving the world as an orderly and comprehensible reality, like that it all fits together, one of the things that modern education brought in was the division of all these subjects, right? So the schools that I went to, there was 45 minutes for math, and then 45 minutes for science, then 45 minutes for English, and then 45 minutes for religion, yada, 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 yada. So that does 2 things. Number one, it divides knowledge for kids. They don't think science has anything to do with literature. They don't think religion has anything to do with math, and so on, right? The other thing from a Catholic perspective, if as a child you tell me that religion class is over here for 45 minutes, maybe daily, maybe not, and then there's all this other stuff, that tells me implicitly that religion doesn't have to do with everything else. So one of the tenets of Catholic classical liberal education is that, like I said before, that Catholic worldview is imbuing everything that you're doing. And it doesn't mean that every science lecture is also that you're also evangelizing. But every class, the pursuit of all knowledge is with the understanding that we are better understanding God's creation so that we can better become the individuals God created us to be. That's why we study grammar. That's why we study calculus. That's why we study art. So that's really one of the main tenets of what makes classical education quite different. So Arcadia, when they surveyed all these schools across the country, they came up with 9 primary benefits of a classical education. And the first on that list was a respect for right and wrong, morality, that there is goodness and there is evil out there. And you get that from fairy tales right off the bat. nursery rhymes, right? That's where all those things start, with the understanding between dragons are bad and the knights that come in and kill them are good, right? So a real sense of morality and a respect for right and wrong. The pursuit of a life of value. So another big part of a classical education is you're learning about the lives and the challenges of great people throughout history. And when you learn about the lives and the challenges of great people throughout history, it makes you want to be a great person and pursue that kind of a life. There's a great respect for civic life. You're learning about the Greek civilization and then the Roman civilization and medieval Europe and modern United States of America, and you're comparing and contrasting all that and saying, what was good about each of these? And what does it mean to be a good citizen? Not because my social studies book came up with a highlight list of 5 things, but because I have studied deeply these different civilizations and I know what was good and what was bad and what I want to do as a citizen in my life. The primacy of family. Catholic schools exist to serve the family. That's the only reason they exist. In fact, if you know the history of education, of Catholic education in the United States, Catholic schools started because the public schools became anti-Catholic. And God bless the bishops of the United States at that time. They got together and they said, we need a Catholic school at every parish, and the pastor has to be responsible to educate them in the faith. And that's why we had the boom in parish schools in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and on. We got to the height in the 1960s, and we've seen nothing but decline ever since. But that was why. The bishops realized we can't send our kids to the public schools anymore because it's undermining their faith. That's why Catholic schools were invented in this country. So the primacy of the family is that the school and the family are in partnership. Okay, you've seen the headlines across the country of public school and parent adversarial relationships these days. That's not the case in these kinds of schools. An ethic of performance, the idea that all human beings should be able to achieve excellence. So I was sitting in our commons area this morning, actually, and a 3rd grader comes running in, tears in his eyes because he's late for school. He's embarrassed. And because he's a 3rd grade boy, he doesn't have a whole lot of self-control, and he bursts through the door of the 3rd grade classroom, says, "I'm sorry, I'm late." And instead of just going, okay, this, Mr. Dudash says, "Young man, come out here. Let's do this the right way." And in the midst of all that, taught him how to knock quietly, sat down and had a conversation with him about these things happen, and we don't need to get worked up about it. We can still be orderly. So it's just having a high bar in everything that you do and understanding that everyone is capable of excellence. It's emphasizing the intellect versus baser instincts. It's a preparation for life in general. And it's a preparation for the workplace. And notice that there's 2 differences there. A preparation for life and a separate number that's preparation for the workplace. Here I want to tell a very quick aside. There's a tech entrepreneur named Michael Ortner who founded, have you heard of Capterra? I think it's they do like that you can compare and contrast like different softwares that are out there, and it tells you. Anyway, it was huge. He sold it for a lot of money. He's a big philanthropist in education, particularly classical now. Why? Because when he was running his tech company, they had a college intern program. So he actually had a full-time position in his company, director of internships, and this guy dealt with college students. And one weekend, Michael, the CEO, meets this guy whose 2 teenage boys, high school boys, are in this local Christian classical school. And so Mike comes back to Capterra, and he goes to his director of internships, and he says, "Hey, can you do me a favor, get these 2 kids an internship?" He goes, "Mike, we deal with college interns. Like, you want me to deal with high school kids? Come on, please." But Mike says, "No, I really want you to do this. I want to do this guy a favor." So these Christian classically educated kids come into Capterra and start running circles around the college interns, to the point where they did away with their college internship program and have a relationship directly with this Christian classical school now, and that's where they get their interns from. And so this director of interns, after a few weeks of these high school kids being there, comes into Michael's office. He says, "Where did you find these kids? They're not human." And Michael looked at him, he goes, "No, that's how all kids should be. And if they're not, they're being robbed." Right? So that's the kind of, when we talk about workplace preparation, the idea of being able to see patterns and make critical judgments on the fly and learn new things. All the tech entrepreneurs are saying, give me critical thinkers. I can teach them the technology part in a matter of months, but I can't teach them how to think well, how to reason well. So that's the kind of people they want in the workforce these days. So the key differentials from would-be competitors, what makes classical schools different from other kinds of schools? Again, that cultivation of virtuous character, being really deliberate about that, is a big differentiator. The coherence that I mentioned, where these things fit together, we see how reality is one big puzzle and it all fits together. It doesn't compete with each other. The idea of teachers being role models. Sadly, like the job of a teacher today in modern progressive education is like they're handed a binder and just said, be a monkey and just regurgitate what we tell you. Read the script. Don't deviate from it. It's a really disheartening career these days, which is why I think you see a lot of teachers fleeing from it. Very high quality curricula, things that have stood the test of time, that aren't simply the latest and greatest. A real emphasis on patriotism and an appreciation for Western heritage. And then an ability to understand and talk about and recognize the existence of the transcendentals, the things that are not able to be put under a microscope. So there you can see some numbers. In the 23-24 school year, there's almost 250,000 students in Christian evangelical classical schools, a little over 60,000 in Catholic classical schools. There's a huge growth in the classical public charter school movement. Networks like the Great Hearts Network in the southwestern states are booming. And then a lot of classical homeschooling as well. So you've got, upwards of a little over 500,000 students enrolled in some type of classical education these days. And then the growth is what's also stunning. There's a 4.8% annual estimated rate of new school growths over the next few years based on what we've seen since 1920. Okay, so lots of new schools like the Camino Schools are popping up, again, because parents are wanting it. They know that it's out there and they want to give the best that they can to their children. The other report that I just want to very briefly highlight from and then get to Q&A is from the Heritage Foundation called Classical Schools in America, a Movement of Hope. And this just came out a few weeks ago. And I love this quote that's in the introduction here. It says, but parents are not simply seeking education freedom, because as we know, lots of states are opening up school choice programs, and there's a lot of growth in that arena, which is very positive. However, they point out they are in increasing numbers seeking an education for freedom for their children, a classical liberal arts education that aims to form adults capable of understanding, exercising, and protecting their American rights and responsibilities. That's really the kind of things that classical education allows young people to do. So the Heritage Foundation articulated 3 ideas that animate and unite classical schools. When we say, what do we mean by a classical school, they came up with these 3 basic ideas. An appreciation for the great tradition, an appreciation for the art of learning, and again, there we see that character formation. So when they say great tradition, what do they mean? It's the understanding that education is the passing down of wisdom from past generations. That's why schools are such great cultural changers, cultural renewers, because it's the idea of passing on a culture from one generation to the next. So a parent, or typically when you see these schools pop up, it's because a parent or group of parents catches a glimpse of the rich intellectual tradition that has shaped human history, and they feel awed and robbed. And that's exactly how I felt when I discovered all of this. I walked into that classroom at St. Jerome Academy in Hyattsville, and I was awed. This is incredible. And my next thought was, how come I didn't get this? My parents bent over backwards to give me a solid Catholic education. Why was this left out? An appreciation for the liberal arts. Students learn not only the parts of language, but also the principles of formal logic and rhetoric, so that they may learn to reason, speak, and write well. So it's not just about coming up with facts, but by being able to do things with those facts. Compare and contrast, argue. It's an appreciation for the great books. Classical schools teach these texts, ranging from Homer's Odyssey, Euclid's Elements, and Shakespeare's plays, to the Declaration of Independence, not simply because they've impacted the course of history, and therefore our own time, but because they transcend time. The great books are really what allow students to have a conversation with those great people in history. I mean, when you read Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail and understand that a lot of that was based on the fact that he read Thomas Aquinas, that he read the Greek tragedies, you can start to have a conversation with these people in history because you're both reading the same texts. And that's a really inspiring thought. And so there's a lot of emphasis on primary texts in classical schools. Not a summary in a textbook, but actually engaging with the primary text, just like those great people in history did. There were no textbooks 100 years ago. Parents as educators, which I already highlighted a bit before. Consistent with their parent-driven origins, classical schools tend to recognize parents as the primary educators of their children and therefore partners rather than subordinates to the school. I've seen way too many headlines in the last couple of years of parents being treated like subordinates by educators. So what do they mean when they talk about classical schools appreciating the art of learning? It's the idea that you want students to be lifelong learners. I love this quote right here. Classical schools presume not to complete a student's education, but prepare him to complete it for himself. That ties in exactly with what Father Glenn was talking about in the homily today, right? We're constantly called to renew ourselves as Christians, to get better, to become better versions of the person that God created us to be. The only way to do that is if we understand how to continually learn and continually get better, which is what classical education allows for students. An appreciation for attention and memory. The tools classical schools focus on honing are the mental powers inherent to human nature that, like their physical counterparts, will enervate if usurped by external aids. Foremost among these capacities are those of attention and memory. So instead of just throwing in the towel and saying, you know what, young people today, they just don't have the same attention span that they used to. Classical schools say, no, then let's develop that attention span again. Let's get those muscles working again. And I can't tell you the awe that I saw in people's faces at Holy Innocents when I would give tours and I would take them into the kindergarten class where the teacher was trained in the Montessori method, the catechesis of the Good Shepherd, and would literally have kindergartners sitting by themselves for hours at a time, silently engaging in some kind of work or some kind of activity. Well over an hour. 5-year-olds. Silent. Engaged. They can do it. We just have to raise the bar again. And finally, reason. Classical schools understand that facts are useless without the corresponding capacity to reason about them, which I've also already mentioned. So why do people like the Heritage Foundation, Arcadia Education, and parents all over the country see classical schools as such a reason for hope? Heritage summarizes it this way. By inviting students to join mankind's greatest thinkers in pondering life's deepest questions, a classical liberal arts education broadens students' horizon beyond the opinions and anxieties that dominate their own place and time. And by equipping them with the virtues necessary to learn for themselves, it prepares them to continue their education, bearing fruit not just for themselves, but for their neighbors as well. And that's what we at the Camino School really hope happens with this endeavor. Is that yes, we serve parents' needs by helping them educate their children, but we do it not only for that reason, but so that these young people will go on and lead lives that impact the culture around them, and that we can truly, by doing that, renew the culture of California once again.